Welcome to Starbound. My name's Chikondi, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new episodes of Sunspire Academy and Farron and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now let's get into today's story. Lieutenant Miles Webb ran a soft cloth along the gleaming barrel of a 19th century Colt Navy revolver, his movements loving and methodical. The weight of the weapon felt right in his hands, solid, dependable, honest in a way modern technology rarely was. Colt Model 1851, .36 caliber, 6-shot percussion revolver, he murmured, finding comfort in the recitation of facts. Approximately 215,000 produced in Hartford between 1851 and 1873. The specimen's serial number, he added, squinting at the number stamped on the frame, places its manufacture in 1858. The cylinder still shows the standard roll-engraved scene, the victory of the 2nd Texas Navy at the Battle of Campeche. The empty museum echoed with his voice. Here, surrounded by the preserved implements of humanity's violent past, Miles found a peace that eluded him elsewhere on Diplomatic Station Alpha. His fingers traced the worn walnut grip, imagining the hands that held it before him, perhaps a frontiersman heading west, a riverboat gambler, maybe even a Civil War soldier. The sudden blare of the intercom shattered his reverie. Lieutenant Webb, this is your 30-minute notification. The Veloxian diplomatic delegation will arrive at 0900 hours for their scheduled tour. Commander Abercrombie requests that all preparations be complete by their arrival. Miles fumbled the revolver, nearly dropping the historical artifact before securing it with trembling hands. He carefully returned it to its display case, double-checking the atmospheric seal that protected it from the station's recycled air. "Acknowledged," he replied to the empty room, knowing the station's AI would register his response. Another tour for bored diplomats, another opportunity to stumble through social interactions while trying to convey the importance of these historical pieces that most visitors regarded as quaint curiosities at best, barbaric relics at worst. The door to the museum hissed open, and Commander Abercrombie entered, her crisp uniform and perfect posture making Miles acutely aware of his own rumpled appearance. "Lieutenant Webb," she said, her tone clipped, "the Veloxians are an extremely important delegation. Their technology is decades beyond ours, and establishing good relations could significantly advance our position in the Galactic Council." "Yes, Commander. I've prepared a comprehensive overview of humanity's projectile weapon development from matchlocks to—" Abercrombie held up a hand. "Keep it brief this time, Webb. These are energy beings who've evolved beyond physical combat. They're not interested in 2-hour lectures on rifling techniques." Miles swallowed. "Of course, Commander." "And for the love of God, try not to scare anyone with detailed descriptions of battlefield amputations again. The Nebulon ambassador still mentions it in their quarterly reports." "That was just contextual information about the development of medical field. Just keep it simple, son," Abercrombie sighed, already turning to leave. "And remember to make eye contact occasionally, with the delegates, not just the weapons." As the door closed behind her, Miles adjusted his uniform and began a final inspection of the displays. He understood the subtext of her instructions. Be normal, be forgettable, don't embarrass the station. He ran through social scripts in his head, practicing the expected small talk. "Welcome to Diplomatic Station Alpha's Historical Weapons Repository. I'm Lieutenant Miles Webb, Curator and Historical Preservation Officer." The words felt stiff, rehearsed, because they were. At precisely 0900 hours, the museum doors opened again. The Veloxians floated more than walked into the room. Contained within environmental suits that gave them humanoid form, their true nature was visible as swirling luminescent energy that pulsed with complex patterns behind transparent sections of their protective gear. The effect was both beautiful and unnerving, like bottled lightning pretending to be human. Station Commander Hayes, a tall woman with short gray hair and the confident bearing of someone used to commanding rooms, led the delegation.
"This is our historical weapons repository,"
Hayes announced, her voice pitched to carry.
"While most of our station showcases humanity's current technological achievements, we maintain this museum to preserve the context of our developmental journey."
Miles noted the diplomatic framing, our developmental journey, not our violent past.
"Lieutenant Webb here serves as our curator and resident expert,"
Hayes continued, gesturing toward him.
"He'll provide you with an overview of these historical artifacts."
Hayes caught his eye with a look that clearly communicated, "Don't mess this up." Then she smiled at the Veloxians.
"I must attend to other diplomatic matters, but Lieutenant Webb will ensure your experience is informative. I'll rejoin you for the afternoon session."
And with that, she was gone, leaving Miles alone with the delegation. He cleared his throat. "Welcome to the Historical Weapons Repository," he began, his rehearsed words coming out slightly too fast. "I'm Lieutenant Miles Webb, Curator and Historical Preservation Officer. This facility maintains and studies implements from humanity's pre-phase weapon era, primarily focusing on chemical propellant projectile technologies developed between the 14th and 22nd centuries Earth standard." The Veloxians hovered silently, their environmental suits emitting soft hums as internal systems maintained the energy fields within. Miles couldn't read their expressions. Did they even have expressions? But their stillness made his skin prickle with anxiety. "Perhaps we could begin with an overview of early gunpowder development," he suggested, moving toward a display containing a matchlock musket. "This represents early 16th century technology, where a mechanically lowered match, basically a slow-burning cord, would ignite black powder to propel a lead projectile through a barrel." He demonstrated the mechanism with careful hands, showing how the serpentine lever would lower the smoldering match into the priming pan. Most of the Veloxians drifted slightly backward, but one moved closer, the energy within its containment suit pulsing with what might have been interest. "You propelled lead projectiles with controlled explosions?" a voice asked, somehow emanating from the suit without visible speakers. "And aimed them manually?" The delegation's energy patterns flickered in what Miles interpreted as amusement. "Yes," Miles replied, feeling heat rise to his face. "While primitive compared to modern targeting systems, skilled marksmen could achieve remarkable accuracy through understanding ballistic trajectories and environmental factors." The Veloxians exchanged pulses of light between their suits, clearly communicating in ways Miles couldn't perceive. "Fascinating developmental stage," one commented. "Your species managed interplanetary travel despite relying on such rudimentary methods for so long." Miles tried not to bristle at the condescension. He'd heard similar remarks from countless advanced species who viewed human history as quaintly primitive. "Actually," he said, unable to help himself, "the mechanical reliability of these weapons offered advantages in certain contexts. They required no power source beyond the chemical energy stored in their propellant, functioned in electromagnetic disruption fields, and—" He stopped, noticing the light patterns between the Veloxians intensifying. They were laughing, or whatever their equivalent was, all except the one who had moved closer initially. This Veloxian drifted directly in front of a glass case containing a blunderbuss, its flared barrel and ornate stock drawing their attention. "What is the purpose of this expanded barrel terminus?" the Veloxian asked, energy swirling in complex patterns that somehow conveyed genuine curiosity. Miles stepped carefully toward the case. "That's a blunderbuss, primarily used between the 17th and early 19th centuries. The flared muzzle made loading easier, especially in unstable conditions like naval combat. It also dispersed multiple projectiles in a spread pattern, increasing hit probability at close range without requiring precise aim." "Ingenious solution, given the technical constraints," the Veloxian observed. "May I inquire about the ignition mechanism? I don't see the burning cord you mentioned." The other Veloxians had begun drifting toward other displays, their interest clearly waning, but this one remained, its energy pulses somehow more distinct, individual.
This model uses a flintlock mechanism, Miles explained, his tension easing slightly as he entered more comfortable territory. When the trigger is pulled, a spring-loaded hammer holding a piece of flint strikes this steel plate, called a frizzen, creating sparks that ignite the priming powder in this pan, which then ignites the main charge through this small hole called a touch hole. He pointed out each component, his hands steadier now, voice finding its natural rhythm.
Fascinating mechanical cascade, the Veloxian said. The engineering challenge of creating reliable ignition with the material science of the time shows remarkable problem-solving capability.
Something about this Veloxian's manner was different, the questions more specific, the energy patterns more distinct from the others.
I'm Ixlara,
the Veloxian offered, surprising Miles with the unprompted introduction.
My role in our delegation is to observe and document technological approaches different from our own. May I ask what differentiates this ignition system from the percussion mechanism displayed there?
It gestured toward a nearby case containing several cap and ball revolvers. Miles blinked, unused to visitors showing genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. The percussion system was a significant advancement, he explained, moving to the indicated display. Instead of exposed priming powder, it uses a copper cap containing fulminates that ignite when struck by the hammer. This made the weapons more reliable in varied weather conditions and increased firing speed. He carefully opened the case and removed a Colt 1849 pocket revolver, his curator's gloves protecting the metal from skin oils. With your permission, I can demonstrate the loading and firing sequence, he offered, surprising himself with the suggestion. He rarely performed demonstrations for visitors who weren't specifically historical scholars.
I would appreciate that very much,
Ixlara replied, floating closer. As Miles walked through the process of measuring powder, seating the ball, placing the percussion cap, and the firing mechanism, he found his usual nervous tension melting away. He explained how the revolver's cylinder rotation aligned each chamber with the barrel, allowing 5 shots before reloading, a revolutionary advancement in its time. The mechanical precision required for proper cylinder alignment was a manufacturing challenge, he noted, warming to his subject. Early revolvers often suffered from chain fire incidents, where sparks from one chamber would ignite adjacent chambers. When he looked up, he realized the other Veloxians had drifted far across the museum, but Ixlara remained, its energy patterns shifting in what appeared to be focused attention.
Your knowledge is impressive, Ixlara said. Most beings we encounter prefer to showcase their latest achievements rather than preserve understanding of developmental stages.
Miles carefully returned the revolver to its display. Understanding our past helps contextualize our present, he said, a phrase he'd repeated often but rarely found receptive audiences for. These weren't just tools, they shaped human history, culture, politics. Ixlara's energy swirled thoughtfully.
I understand that perspective. I'm what my people call a divergent, rare among Veloxians for having partial independence from our hive mind.
Hive mind? Miles asked, curiosity overcoming his usual reluctance to ask personal questions.
Most Veloxians experience consensus reality, Ixlara explained. Thoughts, perceptions, evaluations flow continuously between individuals. Divergents like myself process individual observations before sharing them. We're considered slightly aberrant, but useful for diplomatic missions where independent assessment has value.
Miles nodded slowly. That must be difficult, being valued for the very thing that makes you different.
You understand?
Ixlara's energy pulsed in what might have been surprise.
Most non-Veloxians find our consciousness structure too alien to grasp such nuances.
Heh, well, I've never quite fit into human military structure either, Miles admitted, surprised by his own candor. Too focused on details others consider irrelevant, not attentive enough to social hierarchies and unspoken rules. Their moment of understanding was interrupted by the station's announcement system. Attention, all personnel and visitors. Tomorrow's scheduled reception for the Multi-Species Diplomatic Conference will be held in the Historical Weapons Repository at 1400 hours. All relevant departments, please prepare accordingly. Miles felt his chest tighten. No one had informed him about hosting a reception.
Your energy patterns have changed, Ixlara observed. Does this announcement cause distress?
Sorry. I'm not a big fan of parties, Miles admitted, especially with no preparation time.
Perhaps I could attend, Ixlara offered. We could continue our discussion about humanity's technological progression. I find your perspective illuminating.
Before Miles could respond, the other Veloxians had returned, their energy patterns synchronized once more. We must proceed to our next appointment, one announced, not addressing Miles directly, but clearly communicating to Ixlara.
Thank you for your insights, Lieutenant Webb, Ixlara said. I look forward to our continued exchange tomorrow.
As the delegation departed, Miles stood motionless for several moments, processing the unexpected interaction. Someone had actually been interested in his knowledge. Someone had seen value in his perspective. And now he had to prepare for a diplomatic reception with less than 24 hours' notice. The next morning found Miles frantically reorganizing the museum. He'd worked through the night, moving displays to create open space for the reception while ensuring the most valuable artifacts were securely protected from the increased foot traffic. This is a weapons museum, not a cocktail lounge, he muttered to himself, carefully adjusting the position of a glass case containing 18th century dueling pistols. 2 security officers entered, performing a routine sweep of the area. Seems quiet enough, the taller one remarked. Don't see why they'd hold a diplomatic function in a museum, but at least it's a low-risk area. Who's going to attack a bunch of old guns? The other agreed with a laugh. Most of this stuff wouldn't even fire anymore. Miles pressed his lips together, resisting the urge to point out that many of the weapons were maintained in working condition for research purposes, their mechanical simplicity making them remarkably durable across centuries. Heard the Aurelians and Melosians will both be attending, the first officer continued. Command's worried about tension between them spilling over. Those scale faces have been at each other's throats for decades, his partner replied. If they want to start something, let them do it somewhere else. I've got retirement in 3 years. Just be glad we only need minimal presence here. Nothing but old junk that nobody cares about. Miles winced at the description, but remained silent as they continued their sweep. He'd long ago learned that correcting others rarely led to positive outcomes. As they completed their inspection near the restoration workshop at the rear of the museum, their conversation shifted to the diplomatic visitors. Can't stand the way those Melosian delegates look at humans, like we're some kind of primitive species just because we haven't been spacefaring as long. Better than the Kelvari ambassador. Heard he called humans developmentally stunted by biological limitations in the last council meeting. Rich coming from a bunch of fart breathers. Their xenophobic comments continued as they left, leaving Miles uncomfortable but unsurprised. Such attitudes weren't uncommon, especially among those who felt threatened by species with technological or evolutionary advantages over humanity. He returned to his preparations, trying to focus on the task at hand rather than his anxiety about the impending social event. By the time the reception began, the museum had been transformed. Display cases had been rearranged to create a central space where station staff had set up refreshment tables and seating areas. Soft lighting highlighted select historical pieces, while informational holographic displays activated when visitors approached specific exhibits. Miles stood near the entrance, uniform pressed and uncomfortably tight around his neck. Commander Abercrombie had insisted he act as official host, a role he was profoundly unsuited for. As diplomats from a dozen different species began arriving, Miles attempted the greeting script he'd rehearsed all morning. Welcome to Diplomatic Station Alpha's Historical Weapons Repository. I'm Lieutenant Miles Webb, curator and... His mind blanked momentarily. person in charge of the guns." The Malosian diplomat blinked multiple eyelids in what might have been confusion or amusement before moving past him without response. Miles exhaled shakily. This was going to be a long afternoon. An hour into the reception, he had retreated to a relatively quiet corner near a display of Civil War-era rifles. He'd managed to offend at least 3 diplomats with excessive technical details when simple pleasantries were expected, knocked over a tray of canapes while gesturing too emphatically about barrel rifling techniques, and completely forgotten the name of Station Commander Hayes while introducing her to the Aurelian ambassador.
"Your energy patterns suggest distress," a familiar voice observed.
Miles looked up to see Ixlara hovering nearby, the energy within its containment suit swirling in patterns he was beginning to recognize as indicating curiosity. "Social functions aren't my strong suit," he admitted.
"Nor mine," Ixlara replied. "The consensus finds them efficient for information exchange, but I find the constant data flow overwhelming."
The Veloxian gestured toward the rifles Miles had been standing beside.
"Perhaps you could tell me about these weapons. I find your historical contextualization fascinating."
Grateful for the familiar territory, Miles began explaining the technological advancements represented in the display, the transition from smooth-bore muskets to rifled barrels, the development of the Minet ball that expanded on firing to engage the rifling grooves. As he spoke, a small group of diplomats drifted closer, some appearing genuinely interested in the impromptu lecture. Ixlara occasionally asked clarifying questions that helped Miles organize his thoughts more coherently than usual. When he demonstrated how the percussion cap ignition system worked, a Kelvari diplomat made a dismissive noise. "Primitive kinetic weapons," the Kelvari remarked, its tentacles rippling in apparent amusement. "My species had developed particle beam technology while humans were still igniting chemical propellants." Before Miles could respond, an Aurelian diplomat joined the conversation.
"Yet these mechanical devices have interesting properties,"
the reptilian being observed.
"They require no power source beyond their propellant and would function in conditions that would disable energy weapons."
Miles nodded eagerly. "Exactly! The simple mechanical nature of these weapons made them reliable in conditions that would render many advanced weapons inoperable." The Kelvari diplomat made another dismissive gesture and drifted away, but several others remained, seemingly intrigued by this perspective. As Miles continued explaining various historical weapons throughout the reception, he found himself growing more comfortable. When focused on subjects he understood, his usual social awkwardness receded somewhat. Ixlara remained nearby, occasionally guiding other diplomats to join the informal tour. Not everyone appreciated his enthusiasm, however. After a particularly detailed explanation of how rifling spin stabilized projectiles in flight, a human official from Earth's diplomatic corps sighed loudly. "For God's sake, Webb, you are boring everyone with ancient history," the official said, loud enough for several nearby diplomats to hear. "These distinguished guests came for diplomatic engagement, not a lecture on obsolete technology." Miles felt heat rise to his face, the familiar shame of being publicly corrected washing over him. He opened his mouth to apologize, but Ixlara spoke first.
"I find Lieutenant Webb's insights valuable,"
the Veloxian said, energy patterns shifting rapidly.
"Understanding developmental paths provides context for current technological approaches. Perhaps different beings find value in different exchanges."
The official looked surprised at being contradicted, but merely offered a tight smile and moved away. "Thank you," Miles said quietly to Ixlara.
"I merely stated observable truth,"
Ixlara replied. Before Miles could respond, the lights throughout the museum flickered briefly. A moment later, he noticed several security officers checking their communication devices with confused expressions. "Something's wrong," he murmured, more to himself than to Ixlara. The main doors to the museum slid open, and a group of figures entered. At first glance, they appeared to be additional Veloxian delegates, wearing similar environmental suits. But their movements were different, purposeful, coordinated, lacking the drifting quality of the energy beings. Miles felt his chest tighten with sudden awareness. These weren't Veloxians. The lead figure raised a device, and a piercing tone cut through the ambient conversation, drawing all attention.
"Distinguished representatives,"
the figure announced, voice distorted through their environmental suit speakers.
"We are Purity Ascendant, and we act today to cleanse the galaxy of those who would prevent true unity."
The security officers reached for their weapons, but another of the intruders activated a handheld device. A wave of energy pulsed through the room, and the officers' weapons emitted sparks before going dark.
"I wouldn't do anything hasty if I were you,"
the leader continued as his companions began moving through the crowd.
"Resistance is futile and unnecessary. We seek only specific individuals whose removal will benefit galactic harmony."
They began separating certain diplomats from the crowd. Several human officials, including the one who had dismissed Miles earlier, along with representatives from species known for isolationist policies.
"How fitting," the leader remarked, "that architects of division will meet their end surrounded by the tools of humanity's barbaric past. Perhaps there is poetry in this convergence of past and present failures."
In the initial chaos, Miles found himself pushed against a display case. Beside him, Ixlara's containment suit hummed with increased intensity.
"The pulse,"
the Veloxian whispered.
"It's affecting our stabilization fields. We cannot maintain cohesion for long without system restoration."
Miles glanced around frantically, mind racing through options. The terrorists were focused on gathering their targets, paying little attention to those they deemed unimportant.
"Behind the Springfield display," he murmured to Ixlara, "there's a maintenance access panel. We can reach the restoration workshop through the service tunnels."
Taking advantage of the confusion, Miles led Ixlara to the indicated panel, quickly entering his access code. The panel slid open, revealing a narrow passage used by maintenance drones.
"Can your containment suit fit?"
he asked.
"Barely,"
Ixlara replied, its energy visibly fluctuating.
"But I have little choice. The field collapse will disperse my cohesion if I remain exposed to the pulse."
As they entered the passage, Miles heard shouts from the main room. The terrorists had noticed their absence. He sealed the panel behind them, knowing it would only buy them minutes at most.
"This way,"
he urged, leading Ixlara through the cramped tunnel toward the museum's restoration workshop. The workshop was Miles's personal domain, a space where historical weapons were carefully maintained, studied, and occasionally test-fired under controlled conditions. Unlike the mostly display pieces in the museum proper, many items here were fully functional. As they emerged into the workshop, Miles immediately moved to a secure cabinet, entering a complex access code.
"What is your plan?"
Ixlara asked, its containment suit stabilizing somewhat away from the main pulse source.
"The EMP disabled energy weapons, but it wouldn't affect purely mechanical systems,"
Miles explained, opening the cabinet to reveal rows of historical firearms.
"Many of these are maintained in working condition for research and preservation purposes."
He began selecting weapons: a Sharps rifle, a Colt Walker revolver, a blunderbuss, several flintlock pistols, and placing them on the workbench. The maintenance access panel slid open again, and Miles tensed, reaching for the revolver. But instead of terrorists, 3 station personnel stumbled through: a xenobiologist, a communications officer, and a junior security officer whose energy weapon hung uselessly at her side.
"Lieutenant Webb?"
the security officer said in surprise.
"We saw you disappear behind the display and followed. Those bastards are separating hostages into groups. They're going to execute the diplomatic officials."
Miles nodded, continuing to gather weapons and ammunition. His hands, usually trembling in social situations, moved with purpose as he checked each mechanism, loaded powder, and distributed the firearms across the workbench. "Communications are down," the comm officer reported. "We can't reach station security or command." "Then we're on our own," Miles said, his voice steadier than he'd expected. He gestured to the weapons. "These will function despite the EMP. I can show you how to use them."
The xenobiologist eyed the antique weapons skeptically. Museum pieces? Against armed terrorists? Even if they work, they're centuries old. In response, Miles picked up the blunderbuss, quickly loaded it with powder and improvised shot from metal components on his workbench, and turned toward a ballistic testing target at the far end of the workshop. "Cover your ears," he warned, then fired. The weapon roared, belching flame and smoke, and shredded the center of the target, a devastating demonstration of close-range effectiveness. "Physics hasn't changed in 500 years, Miles stated, the ringing in his ears oddly calming. Kinetic energy is still kinetic energy. He turned to the shocked faces of the station personnel. "We need to act quickly. I'll show you how to load and fire these weapons, then we'll use the maintenance tunnels to access different points of the museum. If we work together, we can evacuate hostages and neutralize the terrorists." As he quickly instructed them on basic weapon operation, Miles felt a strange clarity descend over him. The paralyzing anxiety that typically plagued his interactions had vanished, replaced by focused determination. "Remember, these weapons are simple but deadly," he explained, demonstrating how to pour measured powder, seat bullets, and prime firing mechanisms. "Accuracy decreases with distance, so engage only when you have clear advantage. The blunderbuss is widespread. Aim center mass at close range. The rifle is accurate at greater distance, but takes longer to reload." The security officer, a young woman named Rivera, looked at him with newfound respect.
"You really know these antiques, don't you?"
"These antiques shaped human history for centuries," Miles replied, handing her a Remington revolver. "Form firing lines, maintain covered positions, and coordinate your shots. That's how our ancestors fought with these weapons." As he organized their impromptu militia, assigning specific roles based on the limited weaponry available, Miles occasionally slipped into historical speech patterns, unknowingly echoing battlefield commands from Earth's past. "We'll advance in skirmish order," he instructed, checking the percussion caps on his own revolver. "Maintain intervals of 5 paces. When first rank fires, second rank advances while first reloads." The station personnel exchanged glances, but followed his directions. Even Ixlara, whose containment suit had stabilized in the workshop's shielded environment, observed with fascination as this previously awkward human transformed into a confident tactician. Using the maintenance passages, they accessed the museum at multiple points, gradually locating and evacuating small groups of hostages, while avoiding direct confrontation with the terrorists whenever possible. During their third extraction, they encountered a terrorist guard near the Civil War exhibition. The guard raised an alarm, but Rivera fired her revolver before he could activate his communication device. The heavy lead ball struck the terrorist's chest, piercing directly through his energy shield, technology designed to deflect energy weapons, not physical projectiles. The guard dropped with a look of shock visible through his faceplate, clearly having expected his defensive technology to protect him. After successfully moving another group of diplomats to safety, Miles found himself momentarily alone with Ixlara in a storage alcove as they prepared for another incursion.
"Your behavior pattern has changed dramatically," Ixlara observed. "In social contexts, you exhibited stress indicators and communication difficulties. Yet in this crisis, you function with remarkable efficiency."
Miles checked the loading on a pepperbox revolver, his movements automatic after years of handling historical weapons. "I understand these tools," he replied simply. "I understand their history, their purpose, their mechanics. People are more complicated." He glanced toward the museum's central hall, where the terrorists still held their primary hostages. "We've evacuated most civilians, but the terrorist leader, Revik, still has the diplomatic officials."
"You quoted someone named John Brown earlier," Ixlara noted, "when instructing the others on firing positions. Who is this person?"
Miles blinked, unaware he'd used the name. "John Brown was an American abolitionist in the 19th century who fought against slavery. He led an armed incursion to free enslaved people, knowing it would likely fail, but believing the moral principle justified the action. He was executed for this belief," Miles continued, checking the percussion caps on his revolver with careful fingers. His last words were about the beauty of the surrounding countryside and the righteousness of his cause. He died for what he believed was right, that no person should own another.
You admire this historical figure,
Ixlara observed. He was willing to sacrifice everything for his principles, Miles replied, loading another paper cartridge. Few beings in any species can claim that level of moral courage. Ixlara's energy swirled thoughtfully.
Sometimes violence becomes necessary when peaceful options are exhausted. Is that not the central paradox of maintaining these weapons while seeking diplomatic solutions?
Before Miles could respond, Major Sam Hunter, the station's security chief, appeared from another access tunnel. She'd been freed during their second extraction and had quickly joined their resistance efforts, though she'd initially questioned Miles's leadership. "We've established a secure area in Maintenance Section 5, she reported. "Most hostages are safe, but Revik's holding the remaining diplomats in the central hall. They've deployed explosives at key structural points. If detonated, they'll breach the station's hull." Hunter's expression was grim. "Station defenses are still offline from the EMP. We need to end this now before Revik realizes he's lost most of his hostages." Miles nodded, suddenly remembering something. "There's an old ventilation shaft above the display hall, a remnant from before the modern atmospheric systems were installed. It would allow a single person to get a clear shot at Revik." Major Hunter frowned. "I should take the shot. I'm the trained security officer." Miles shook his head. "The shaft will only support one person, and it requires using this." He held up a Baker rifle, a long-barreled muzzle loader from the early 19th century. "It's the only weapon with sufficient range and accuracy for the angle involved, but it requires specific loading knowledge to be effective at that distance." Hunter studied him for a moment, clearly weighing her options. "Fine," she conceded reluctantly, "but I'll lead the frontal distraction. We'll draw their attention while you get into position." As they finalized their plan, Ixlara approached Miles. The Valorians' energy patterns had grown more distinct during their time together, individual swirls and pulses now recognizable to Miles as expressing specific thoughts or emotions.
The probability of success seems marginal,
Ixlara noted. "Many important things in history happened against the odds," Miles replied, carefully measuring powder for the Baker rifle. "Sometimes all you need is one perfect shot." Ixlara's energy pulsed.
The Veloxian consensus would calculate risk differently. We would seek alternatives with higher success probability.
"What would you, Ixlara, not the consensus, do?" Miles asked, looking directly at the swirling energy within the containment suit. The energy patterns stilled momentarily, then reformed in a new configuration.
I would acknowledge that sometimes a divergent path, while statistically improbable, represents the most logical choice given limited options. I would support your attempt.
Miles nodded, feeling an unexpected connection with this being so different from himself, yet similarly outside the expected patterns of their respective species. "This shaft will take me above the display hall," he explained, opening a narrow access panel near the ceiling. "Major Hunter will attempt to negotiate with Revik, drawing his attention forward. That should give me the angle I need." He hefted the Baker rifle, its wooden stock smooth against his cheek as he checked the sight alignment one final time. "Historical accuracy increases with proper procedure," he said, more to himself than to Ixlara. Then, with unexpected impulse, he added, "If this doesn't work out, I'm glad I met you." Before Ixlara could respond, Miles pulled himself into the narrow shaft and began the careful journey toward his position. The ventilation shaft was cramped and dusty, clearly unused since the station's modernization. Miles moved carefully, the Baker rifle secured across his back as he navigated by dim emergency lighting. Despite the tension of the situation, he found comfort in the methodical progress, each movement calculated, each turn mapped in his mind from studying the station's original schematics. When he reached the position above the central hall, he carefully removed a ventilation grill, creating a narrow opening that provided a clear view of the scene below. Revik stood surrounded by his remaining followers, the hostages kneeling in a semicircle before him. Major Hunter had entered from the main entrance, her hands raised. "Your operation has failed," Hunter was saying, her voice steady despite the weapons pointed at her. "Station security has evacuated most hostages and surrounded this section. There's no scenario where you leave this station alive unless you surrender now." Revik's laugh was distorted through his environmental suit speakers.
Always the same arrogance. You think because you wear a uniform, you control the outcome? I didn't come here to leave alive, Major. We will make do with or without me.
He gestured to the kneeling diplomats.
These beings spread division and xenophobia across the stars. Their removal will send a message that the old ways of thinking cannot continue.
As Hunter continued her distraction, Miles carefully positioned the Baker rifle through the opening, its long barrel steadied against the edge of the shaft. He measured the powder, tamped the heavy lead ball with the ramrod, and checked the priming pan. Below, Revik grew increasingly agitated as Hunter continued to stall. He raised his weapon toward the hostages.
Enough delays! The cleansing begins now!
Miles took aim, controlling his breathing as he'd practiced countless times in the museum's restoration workshop. In his mind, he recited the calming mantra that had always centered him. Measure twice, pour once. Seat firmly, prime lightly. Steady pressure, not a pull. For a brief moment, he imagined himself as John Brown at Harper's Ferry, outnumbered, facing overwhelming odds, but absolutely certain of his moral courage. He squeezed the trigger. The Baker rifle roared, screaming flame and smoke into the confined space of the ventilation shaft. Through watering eyes, Miles saw his shot strike true. Revik staggered backward, clutching his chest where the heavy lead ball had devastated his environmental suit. But even as he fell, Revik's hand moved to his belt, activating a device strapped there. A rapid beeping filled the hall. Dead man's switch, Miles realized with horror. The explosives were armed. Without hesitation, he pushed himself through the ventilation opening, dropping the 8 meters to the floor below. Pain shot through his ankle as he landed awkwardly, but adrenaline carried him forward as Major Hunter and her officers engaged the remaining terrorists. The explosive device lay next to Revik's body, its display showing a rapidly decreasing countdown. Miles had studied enough historical ordnance to recognize the design. A focused plasma charge designed to breach the station's hull without destroying the entire section. Direct disarming would be impossible in the time available. A desperate plan formed in his mind. Grabbing ballistic shields from a nearby historical police equipment display, he began layering them around the device, creating a makeshift containment system. "Everyone out now!" he shouted to Hunter, who was evacuating the former hostages. "Get to the pressure doors!" Ixlara appeared from a side entrance, its containment suit humming with increased energy.
Miles, our scans indicate the explosion cannot be contained with these materials,
the Veloxian urged.
You must evacuate with the others.
No time, Miles replied, continuing to stack ballistic materials around the device. If I can direct the blast upward rather than outward, it might spare the hull integrity. The countdown showed 15 seconds remaining. Please go, he told Ixlara, gently pushing the Veloxian's containment suit away. As Major Hunter led the lost evacuees through the pressure doors, Miles positioned himself over the device, adding his body weight to the containment materials. 10 seconds. This is the right thing to do, he said to himself more than anyone else. John Brown understood that some principles are worth any sacrifice. 5 seconds. As the final moments ticked away, Miles experienced a strange clarity. How fitting that his life's purpose would be fulfilled here, among the historical artifacts he'd always valued more than his present reality. What a beautiful place to die, he whispered, unconsciously echoing Brown's final words. The explosion came not as a single blast, but as a series of concussive waves that seemed to bend reality around him. Pain beyond description engulfed him, then merciful darkness. Consciousness returned gradually, accompanied by the sterile smell of medical antiseptic and the soft hum of monitoring equipment. Miles opened his eyes to find himself in the station's medical bay, surrounded by advanced regeneration equipment.
Patient has regained consciousness,
A calm voice announced, a Veloxian medical specialist, its containment suit marked with the Galactic Universal Medical symbol. Miles tried to speak, but found his throat too dry for words. A nurse helped him sip water through a straw. "How?" he finally managed.
You were severely injured in the explosion,
The Veloxian medic explained.
The physical containment you created directed much of the blast force, but the concussive wave caused significant internal damage. Our regenerative technology has repaired most of your critical systems, though complete recovery will require additional time.
Movement at the periphery of his vision drew his attention. Ixlara hovered nearby, its containment suit's energy patterns shifting rapidly in what Miles now recognized as relief. "You survived," Miles whispered, still processing this unexpected outcome.
As have you,
Ixlara replied, moving closer.
though I understand your confusion. By all physical laws, your actions should have resulted in your termination.
"Why didn't they?"
The Veloxian consensus made a unanimous decision to intervene with our most advanced medical technology,
Ixlara explained.
Your actions represented qualities we have seldom observed: resourcefulness in crisis, courage despite overwhelming odds, willingness to protect others despite philosophical differences.
Miles tried to absorb this information, his historian's mind already cataloging the experience for future reference, assuming he had a future. "The delegates?" he asked.
All survived, including the xeno-fearful ones, Ixlara confirmed. Several have requested permission to visit you once you are stronger. It seems near-death experiences occasionally provoke perspective adjustments.
Over the following days, as Miles gradually regained strength, a steady stream of visitors came to the medical bay. Commander Abercrombie arrived with formal notification of a commendation and promotion, though her uncomfortable expression suggested station leadership remained unsure what to do with their suddenly heroic museum curator. "You'll retain your position with the Historical Weapons Repository," she assured him, "but with expanded authority and resources. Your knowledge proved unexpectedly valuable." Major Hunter visited to deliver a more genuine thanks. "I misjudged you, kid. I guess, nerds are useful once in a while," she admitted, standing stiffly at the foot of his recovery bed. Most surprising were visits from several of the formerly xenophobic diplomats, including the human official who had dismissed him at the reception. Their gratitude seemed sincere, if sometimes awkwardly expressed, and Miles noted subtle shifts in how they discussed other species, small changes in language and perspective that suggested the experience had prompted at least some reflection. Throughout his recovery, Ixlara remained a constant presence, dividing time between diplomatic duties and sitting with Miles, often engaging him in discussions about human history and the parallels with Veloxian development.
Our divergence from consensus was once considered a grave disorder,
Ixlara explained during one such conversation.
Individuals were reabsorbed into the hive mind through energy realignment. Only after encountering other sentient species did we recognize potential value in perspective diversity.
Humanity has a similar history, Miles noted. Those with neurological differences were often institutionalized or forced to conform. Recognition of neurodiversity's value came late in our development.
Perhaps all sentient life follows similar patterns in different forms,
Ixlara suggested, energy swirling thoughtfully. When Miles was finally released from medical care, he found the museum had been restored and expanded. A new exhibit chronicled the Diplomatic Station Alpha incident, presenting the events as a case study in how historical knowledge maintained relevance in the modern era. During a private tour before the official reopening, Ixlara asked how he felt about his actions being memorialized. Miles studied the display, which included the damaged Baker rifle, recovered blunderbuss, and fragments of the ballistic shields he'd used in his desperate containment attempt. "I feel conflicted," he admitted. "I'm proud to have protected others, but I'm uncomfortable with praise. I'm not sure I did anything heroic. Just applied knowledge anyone in my position would have used."
An interesting counterfactual proposition, Ixlara remarked, but data suggests otherwise. Few beings would have recognized the potential of obsolete technology in that context. Fewer still would have risked personal termination for beings who had shown contempt for their existence.
The Veloxian's energy shifted to a pattern Miles hadn't observed before.
I have requested extended diplomatic assignment on this station to study practical historical applications. The consensus approved, recognizing potential value in deeper understanding of human developmental paths.
The careful phrasing didn't disguise the underlying meaning. Ixlara wanted to remain close to Miles, finding their connection valuable beyond diplomatic necessity. 2 weeks later, Miles conducted his first official tour since the incident. The museum was filled with diplomats from species previously uninterested in human history, now curious about the technological artifacts that had proven unexpectedly effective. His presentation style remained detail-oriented, but had gained a confidence previously absent. When explaining how gunpowder weapons functioned, he no longer apologized for humanity's violent past, but instead contextualized it within the broader framework of species development. "Every sentient species faces existential challenges," he explained, demonstrating a flintlock mechanism to an attentive audience. "The tools developed to address those challenges reflect both necessity and available resources. Understanding technological history helps us recognize patterns across species development." An Earth Fleet admiral, visiting as part of an official delegation, interrupted with a dismissive comment.
Interesting museum pieces, Lieutenant, but hardly relevant to modern defense considerations. Our current energy weapon systems operate on principles these exhibits can't possibly illuminate.
Miles felt the familiar urge to retreat into his shell, to accept the correction and move on. But across the room, he caught Ixlara's gaze, the Veloxian's energy patterns radiating what he now recognized as encouragement. "With respect, Admiral," Miles replied, his voice steady, "recent events demonstrated that technological advancement doesn't always mean improvement in all contexts. Energy weapons failed under conditions where mechanical systems continued to function. History offers perspectives that pure progression models often overlook." A murmur of agreement passed through the assembled diplomats. The Admiral looked surprised, but nodded thoughtfully, rather than arguing further. "History," Miles concluded with newfound assurance, "is never entirely obsolete. It's the foundation we build upon, even when we think we've left it behind." As the tour continued, Miles and Ixlara exchanged a look of mutual understanding across the room. Two divergents who had found connection in their shared appreciation for the unexpected value of the past and the unique perspectives that sometimes only outsiders could provide. In their different ways, they had both learned the same lesson. That which sets you apart can prove to be your greatest strength, even if others fail to see its value until circumstances reveal what was there all along.